On a sunny day, someone was preparing coffee. The steam from the hot water spread the aroma of coffee through the room. The girl making it thought the smell was great, but suddenly someone interrupted her. Annoyed, she turned to the person, wondering what he was planning today. The man sitting there was one of the 4 dukes of the empire, Duke Claude Winterville. His family carried an ancestral legacy a long time ago. The founder of the family desired immense power. Because of that, he made a pact with the demon, gaining access to monstrous physical abilities. As proof of this ancient legend, the descendants of the Winterville family inherited part of these abilities, being born with extraordinary physical powers. As a result, they produced countless swordmasters. And at only 14 years old, Claude became the youngest swordmaster in the entire empire. The Duke's master claimed he could make the whole empire tremble. A man who seemed like a protagonist straight out of a novel. And with all that, the protagonist wondered what the hell could bring this man there. Placing the cup on her table, the girl politely asked him to enjoy his drink. While the man stared at her with crossed arms, the girl could only question why, of all places, this man would be here. The Duke stated he heard that her ex-fiance would be visiting the cafe today. Surprised, the barista asked if he was referring to Zenon Olsen. The man she referred to was her ex-fiance. They had broken up just 4 months ago. The girl had been charmed by his handsome looks, but all that beauty was hiding something. Upon discovering his true intentions, she couldn't stay by his side anymore. If things had gone their course, the protagonist would have married him, drawn in by his compliments and sweet words. She would have been deceived and accepted his proposal, truly believing he was her prince and would save her from this world. But contrary to all that, Zenon actually wanted to use her to obtain the title of Duke, and she, being discovered by Claude, would have met a painful death by the blade of his sword. Obviously, all of this would only have happened if she had followed the plot of the story she had read. A story now inside the body of a character trying to avoid that fate. The protagonist opened a cafe far from the capital. Even so, despite all her efforts, Claude, the Duke destined to kill her, was right in front of her. Drinking his coffee, the Duke asked if she still had feelings for Zenon, since apparently her ex-fiance was going to visit her confused. The girl froze for a second, then screamed in denial. She stated the man was coming on his own and hadn't even been invited. In her mind, the young woman thought there were no feelings involved. Feeling relieved they had broken up, thoughtful, Claude pointed out that for someone who had no feelings for him, she had served him quite affectionately. Trying to explain, the girl said that was only because he was a customer. Her cafe was on the verge of bankruptcy, and she couldn't afford to throw out her customers, no matter who they were. If rumors spread that she had expelled someone for personal reasons, there would be no other outcome but the closure of her business. Hearing all that, the Duke said that if that was the case, it had worked well. Annoyed, the protagonist wondered what he meant by that, doubting if the Duke was trying to mock her. Standing up, Claude approached hesitant. The protagonist took a step back, startled by his sudden advance. Claude held her hand and pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her waist. As they stared at each other, the girl wondered if this wasn't a bit too close. Their faces almost touching and stuttering with nervousness, the young woman asked what he meant by his last sentence. Claude said that since her business was going through hard times, it was lucky to have someone like him by her side. Then the man pointed out that in times like these, the young woman would need regular customers. As the Duke ran his hand through her hair, the girl said that was all true, but she didn't understand why he brought it up so suddenly. Smiling, Claude said he would be her regular customer from now on. Shocked, the protagonist froze. After all, now she had a problematic customer on her hands, finally understanding what the Duke meant when he said her behavior at the cafe had worked well. The young woman just wanted to live a peaceful life making coffee. But it turns out that about 3 months ago, a girl named Yoon Mina, a busy college student, met the good old Truck, the greatest recruiter for isekai's. After her death, when she opened her eyes again, the girl realized her mind was inside the body of the villainess from a romance she loved, a woman named April Leonin from the book Irene of the White. According to the original story, she had an incredible talent for white magic. Her most notable ability was her healing power. Her power was similar to something divine, making it possible to heal curses and even mental afflictions. Luckily, the protagonist knew all the nuances of the novel. With that, she had ended her engagement with Zenon before anything could happen. Furthermore, she made sure to take sweet revenge on the Linen family, who had neglected her for a long time. Everything was falling into place at this point. However, there was a small problem. After all that, she questioned what she would do to survive from now on. It would be great to use the abilities of the character she had reincarnated into, but sighing, the girl thought she didn't even know how to activate them. Suddenly, a waiter appeared and brought her a coffee. Claiming the protagonist had ordered it, her eyes lit up and she thought this was perfect. With an old man, she bought a property at an affordable price. then cleaned the windows, swept the floors while suffering from back pain, and then fixed the decorations until everything was finally ready, just thinking that she was finally opening her own cafe. Something she had dreamed of even before coming to this world brought such an overwhelming emotion that she could even cry, even though the girl ended up a bit far from the capital due to budget issues. She didn't let that shake her, trying to focus on the positive side of having opened her own cafe, and now not having to worry about dying out of nowhere because of some noble's petty fight. In her past life, all of this would have been an impossible dream. After all, she was always too busy trying to survive, which made such a task basically impossible. Ironically, who would have thought all those years of part-time work would finally serve a purpose? But this wasn't the time to dwell on the past. It was time to forget what was left behind and start over from scratch. 1 month later, the protagonist yawned and grumbled, wondering why she hadn't gotten any customers today. In reality, she knew very well that opening a cafe in a rural area would be difficult, but she didn't expect there to be so few customers. While the girl was getting ready to open the cafe, the local residents always mocked her, wondering if she was really selling anything. After all, to them, coffee and desserts were things only nobles enjoyed, not fitting in with the locality. Some even bullied her, saying that the girl from the capital just wanted to show off a little. The girl still had some funds in reserve, so everything was fine for now. But if she kept going at this pace without gaining any flow, things could get a bit dangerous. April wondered how she could attract more customers, when suddenly she noticed a boy at the window, mesmerized by the view of something. The protagonist realized the boy was looking at the cakes in the display. He had a delighted expression, practically drooling. The door opened and April approached the boy, calling out to him, asking if he didn't want to come in instead of just staring from the outside. The boy looked a bit sad, lowering his head, saying he couldn't. After all, he didn't have any money. The protagonist didn't understand at first, but the boy explained, saying he would need money to eat, but he didn't have any at the moment. Kneeling down and comforting the boy, April said he was right, that he needed money to buy something. But today, she would give him a free sample. And when he asked why, the girl replied with a smile that it was because he was her first customer of the day. And with that, the protagonist joked, saying that his big older sister was also really hungry and didn't want to eat alone, then asking if they could eat together. Happy, the boy asked if they really could do that, and April agreed. With the table set, the boy sat down and the protagonist asked him to enjoy the meal. The boy thanked her and quickly began to eat. She laughed, asking him not to eat so fast, explaining that he could take his time, something the boy agreed with. Drinking a glass of milk, he pointed out that it was really delicious, like little sweet clouds were mixed into the milk. Happy April thanked him for the compliment and thought it was extremely adorable. After all, it was just a bit of honey mixed into the milk. Changing the subject, the young woman asked his name and the boy answered that his name was Asal. The barista said it was a very adorable name. Until that moment, April had no idea. But the little child now sitting right in front of her might be the reason her life would turn completely upside down. In front of the establishment, a woman was shouting, questioning how she was still supposed to deal with this. And irritated, she asked if April was going to say anything in her defense. The girl thought she couldn't quite understand. After all, her way of greeting customers had never made anyone uncomfortable. With a hand on her head, the protagonist tried to think for a moment. But the woman in front of her then questioned why she was just sighing now, while dealing with the sick child. Asal, who was holding the woman's hand, had a sad expression as he called the girl his sister. Resuming her speech, the protagonist asked if she was really saying that Asal had a stomachache after eating her food. But the woman pointed out that she had already said countless times that this wasn't the case. The incident had started about a week ago when she first met Asal. April had told the boy that whenever he was hungry, he could come to the cafe at any time. However, that was when something happened. The boy was embarrassed, saying he wouldn't be able to pay for it. But the protagonist pointed out that he didn't necessarily need to pay with money for his food, and said that instead, Asal could bring her some fresh flowers, saying she needed some for decoration, thus trying to make a fair trade with the boy. She asked for his opinion, and smiling, the boy said that would work very well. The next day, Asal started bringing her bouquets regularly, and thanks to him, the cafe was always filled with the fresh scent of flowers every day. A week passed at this point, and today, as usual, April was planning to share a meal with the boy. But a woman appeared screaming, angrily questioning how she could offer food to a child without his guardian's permission, wondering what she intended to do about the stomachache she had caused in her nephew. Uncomfortable, the protagonist thought that anyone there could see she had treated Asal with the utmost care. She remembered that Asal had lost his mother at the age of 3 and had to grow up without his father, leaving his Aunt Sarah as the only remaining blood relative. But despite that, the woman still didn't value the boy. Although there were no clear signs of violence or abuse, Asal was still largely neglected. The woman didn't pay attention to his meals. and often left the house only returning late at night, leaving him alone. All that neglect was directed at a child only 5 years old. This same woman was now in front of her, demanding compensation while saying she'd have to take the boy to a doctor. And with a smile on her face, the woman even explained that since there was no doctor in their village, the protagonist should also pay for the carriage cost. With a serious expression, April thought the woman was planning to take the compensation money for herself. Clenching her fist tightly, she understood she had tried to resolve things as calmly as possible, but that might not work in this situation. Then April stepped forward and pointed out that even if the woman was his guardian, Sarah wasn't even feeding him properly, indicating that the child seemed to be left alone and neglected even without being fed. Questioning the meaning behind all this, the woman stepped back, but the protagonist continued, asking if Sarah wanted her to let that child go hungry. Extremely irritated, the woman asked if she was being accused of letting the child starve, and said that wasn't the case. She claimed she had given bread to Aesel every day. With a dark expression, the protagonist asked Sarah to take a look at the clothes he was wearing now. After all, the clothes were already very worn out and too small for his size, asking how old he was when his aunt had bought those clothes. Furthermore, April said the aunt had shown no interest in the child's growth. This comment left the woman outraged, and she started yelling again, asking if the protagonist really believed that taking care of a child was that easy, questioning how she was supposed to buy new clothes every season when she was even struggling to put food on the table. The shouting even caught the attention of some women passing by. One of them called Sarah by name and asked what was going on there. The protagonist realized this could become a problem. Since the village was small, people were very close and familiar with one another. And because she was a stranger in that place, this could easily turn against her. Regardless of the truth, the people would side with Sarah. Clenching her wrist, she thought that since the cafe was struggling even to stay afloat, creating conflict now would basically ruin her business for good. Pretending, Sarah then put on an act, saying that her poor nephew Aesel had a stomachache after eating the food made in that cafe. One of the women hearing that asked how the ingredients were being handled at the place, and that in this case, shouldn't they inform the other families about what happened? Outraged, the protagonist asked them to wait a moment, stating that it wasn't true. But she was interrupted by Aesel, who said that Miss April had nothing to do with it. And almost crying, the boy said he wasn't actually sick, and that his aunt had lied about it, pointing out that the cafe owner had only given him food when he was hungry. The woman commented that even so, the girl shouldn't have given food without Sarah's permission, since she was his guardian, and the other passing woman agreed. Putting a hand on her head, the protagonist chuckled a little. After all, she realized she really didn't even want to try being friends with any of those people ever again. Then, extremely irritated, she asked if she should have just let the child go hungry, and if she was wrong for doing what she did. When one of the women tried to speak, April quickly cut her off, saying that obviously it had been wrong on her part to do that without consent. But either way, using that as an excuse to say the child got sick just to extract money was equally wrong. Pointing out that the village women knew even better than her how Sarah had been treating Aesel all this time. Embarrassed by the situation, the women tried to come up with an excuse to leave, saying it was getting late and they should go. Sarah, seeing she had lost their support, asked them to wait a moment, and asked Aesel how he could say that. Irritated, Sarah scolded him, asking how he could be so ungrateful after everything she had done to raise him. Then she asked if he liked the girl so much. Why didn't he just go live with her? Leaving the boy sad behind her, his aunt turned her back and kept walking, telling Aesel not to follow her. The protagonist felt distressed seeing the scene and approached. Aesel turned to her and said that his Aunt Sarah looked extremely angry, wondering what he should do from now on. The girl asked if the boy had another place to stay, but he shook his head. As tears appeared on the boy's face, the protagonist thought she never imagined she would see a child being left behind like that. Because of that, April also had to take responsibility for how Aesel ended up like this. So, putting a smile on her face, the protagonist asked if the boy would like to stay with her for a while. While crying, Aesel asked if that would really be okay, and the girl cheerfully replied that yes, it would. Sometime later, in a courtyard, women were washing clothes in a lake. They were wondering what had gone wrong with Sarah, since she seemed much more aggressive than usual at work. In her mind, the woman complained about Aesel, calling him an ungrateful brat. She thought her life had always been quite miserable. Just a little after getting married, her husband had died. And soon after, her younger brother had left the capital. And so she was forced to return, but this time with someone else. She had barely managed to convince the inhumane villagers who wanted to kick out her unmarried sister, saying she was a disgrace. After Aesel was born, the house that was once desolate was once again filled with laughter and play. It was the only thing that brought them happiness. But soon after, her sister also passed away. At her grave, Sarah complained, saying that just like when she went to the capital, her sister had left her alone once again, and so she was left behind, crying in the rain. She didn't have time to blame her sister for leaving her with her child because she had to work early in the morning to make a living. Sarah had repressed those emotions for a long time because she needed to focus on work. But inevitably, those negative feelings turned against the child. Deep down, she knew the boy was never at fault for any of it. However, even so, she had worked tirelessly all this time to earn money. Suddenly, someone called out to her. A man asked if by any chance she knew someone named Sarah who worked there. Turning around, Sarah said she was the person he was looking for and asked if the man needed help. He replied that the Lord was looking for her and she should follow him. The woman was speechless for a moment, confused about what was going on. In another location, the man asked her to come quickly, as he needed to ask something. He asked if Sarah had a nephew, and the woman nervously replied that yes, that was correct. When asked about the boy's age, Sarah replied that he was 5 years old, and the man continued his questions, asking what his hair color was. She didn't understand the sudden interest in Aesol, but replied that his hair was silver. Smiling, the man explained that he needed to send a telegram to the Duke of Winterville's family, because he believed he had finally found the child who met their criteria. Later that night, in a mansion, the Duke was at his desk with several letters, wondering what this was about. Then he realized they had finally found the child. Claude's older brother, the former Duke of Winterville, had been a deeply loving man. However, there had been a problem. The woman he got involved with was a commoner. The people of Winterville, upon discovering this, strongly opposed the marriage, and in the end, Leonard's love disappeared without a trace. She had only left behind a letter, saying she was sorry for it all. Later, Leonard discovered that his lover had been pregnant when she left, and he immediately tried to find her and his child. However, he was unsuccessful in his search. On his deathbed, he begged his younger brother to please find his child. The former Duke had passed away last winter due to a chronic illness. In the present, the current Duke was smoking a cigarette. Claude thought that this had truly taken a long time. The only clue he had received from the woman was her name, Jane. It had been over a year since letters were sent to the local lords asking for help in finding the child. After all this time, his nephew had finally been discovered, but something bothered him. If the child were to become the rightful heir, he shouldn't have to suffer through something as troublesome as love or marriage. So Claude wondered exactly where the boy was, putting out his cigarette. The man in front of him replied that he was in the territory of Sioren, and the Duke asked him to ready the mana portal, since he would be heading to that territory immediately. Later, the protagonist and Aesol were in a room, the boy sleeping with a cloth on his forehead. Apparently, the boy's fever kept rising, which made the protagonist wonder if it was all due to stress. After all, like it or not, Sarah was the only family the boy had, and being ignored like that in front of him must have been a huge shock. Still clearly unwell, he tried to say he was fine, but the protagonist asked him not to worry and to just rest a bit. April then asked if he was hungry, since he hadn't been able to finish dinner because he was sick. Aesol said he was a little hungry, but didn't really want to eat anything right now. The protagonist thought that apparently his throat was quite swollen, so it was normal for him to have no appetite. Trying to cheer him up, April remembered she could give him a bit of hot chocolate. The boy didn't understand, asking what that was. The young woman replied that it was just something delicious. Already in the kitchen, she prepared a chocolate solution in a bowl over a water bath, thinking that it was something all children liked. But either way, if his fever didn't break and started to drop quickly, they could end up having problems. She remembered Sarah saying there wasn't a doctor in the village, so because of that, finding first aid would be very difficult. And unfortunately, there were no medical supplies in her home. As an outsider there, the girl had no way of knowing something like this would happen. April even asked the local villagers, but all she received was rejection and mockery. Irritated, she thought that this was unacceptable. After all she was asking for was help for a sick child. But there was no point in getting angry now. The protagonist had to hope for the best, and believed the boy would get better soon. And so, April finished making the hot chocolate. As the boy drank it, he truly thought it was absolutely delicious, and the young woman was happy that Aesol liked it. With his spoon, he asked what that white thing was, and the girl replied that it was called a marshmallow. Smiling, the boy said it was a name that sounded really cute, just like a cloud. After the meal, the protagonist asked the boy to close his eyes and sleep, but Aesol said he wanted to play a little more. April replied that they shouldn't do that, after all. He was sick and needed to rest a lot to recover, so they should sleep now and play tomorrow. Smiling, the boy agreed. The next day, the protagonist was sleeping in the corner of the bed while Aesol called out to her. While April was still waking up, her eyes sleepy, the boy, sitting up on the bed, said that his fever was gone, happily saying he didn't feel any pain anymore. Surprised, the protagonist thought something was wrong and asked to check. After all, the boy hadn't taken any medicine, so there was no way he could have improved that much. Placing her hand on his forehead, April realized that what he was saying was true. But worried, she still asked if Aesol really felt better. And smiling, the boy replied, yes, that he didn't feel any pain anymore, saying it was all thanks to her hot chocolate. The protagonist sighed happily, and pinching his cheek, she asked if Asel would like another cup, but the boy tried to lie, saying no. April said she figured she had no choice, saying she was going to make another one for him. Cheerful, the boy asked if that was true, but the protagonist said they should at least buy some bread for breakfast first. Arriving at the bakery, a woman with crossed arms said she was sorry, claiming all the bread had been sold for the day. But that was clearly a lie, with many loaves still on the shelf, which outraged the protagonist. Shaking her head, the vendor explained that all of them were reserved. The protagonist realized she was really a liar, since she had seen a child buying a bag of bread just moments ago. All of this was just discrimination. Feeling the squeeze on her hand, Asel called her. But trying to remain positive, she said it was okay, and that she would bake some bread herself. The boy smiled and agreed. Back at home, April separated the ingredients and placed them on the table, finally putting on her apron. She then wondered what she should make for the meal. April thought white bread took a long time to rise, so instead she could make some buns. And so she began cooking, mixing the ingredients and rolling the dough. The boy asked if he could help with anything, and the protagonist said it was fine, asking if Asel would like to make the next one. Focused, he placed the mold around the dough, pressing and shaping it. Seeing the boy excited about the shape, the protagonist found it truly adorable. Patting his head, the protagonist praised him, but said she'd finish the rest now. First, she needed to place the cut dough on a buttered tray, then brush the surface with egg yolk, before putting it in the oven. After that, she would let them bake for 20 minutes and they'd be ready for breakfast. Perfect to eat with eggs and bacon. Amazed, Asel said they looked really delicious. But April told him to be careful, as they were still very hot. Agreeing, he took a piece and took a big bite, impressed by the taste. He said it was really crunchy and delicious, and the protagonist was happy to hear that. The girl asked if Asel wanted to go for a walk after they finished eating, saying she wanted to go somewhere. And when asked where they were going, the protagonist said he'd find out soon. Sometime later, they returned to the same bakery from before, meeting the attendant who looked a bit uneasy, while the protagonist calmly laughed. The woman asked if she was there to buy bread, and the protagonist said that wasn't the case. This time, she was just there to give her something. She explained that she had made some buns and asked if the woman would like to try them, saying they had just come out of the oven and were still a little warm. When the woman was about to refuse, a child appeared behind her, asking Asel what that was. Smiling, the boy asked if she wanted some, saying he and Miss April had made some buns. The child thanked them, saying they looked delicious. The protagonist felt a bit relieved to see that, at least among children, there was no discrimination. A bit bothered, the woman wondered in her mind why the girl had even accepted to do this. Awkwardly, she thanked them, and April asked them to enjoy their meal. As they walked away, Asel asked why they had given away the buns they had prepared. The protagonist didn't understand at first, but the boy added, pointing out that the woman probably didn't really like her. The protagonist said she knew that, and added that the bakery owner had never sold her anything. The boy, confused, then asked why she gave her the buns. Smiling a little, the protagonist said that just because someone is mean doesn't mean she has to become mean too. And anyway, if she treats her kindly, maybe she'll be treated the same way in return. A bit downcast, the boy asked what she would do if they kept treating her badly. April, thoughtful, simply said that in that case, there wouldn't be anything else she could do. Because after all, even if she was kind, it didn't mean she would receive kindness in return. While the conversation continued, we got a brief introduction to the boxing cat. April then stated that either way, they couldn't let the perfect buns they had baked go to waste. Thoughtful. The boy agreed, reluctantly, but the girl said it was okay, that she understood it was a bit hard for him to grasp that right now, saying that if Asel wanted more, she could bake new ones for him. Cheerful, the boy said that in that case, he would help too. Back at the bakery, while the owner was selling bread to a customer, her daughter asked if she could eat the snack that was given to her. The woman told her not to eat it. In her mind, she thought she should have done something to drive them away that morning, complaining that she probably wouldn't have enough salt for that. Like any being her age, the child didn't listen and took a bite, saying it was really delicious. Her mother quickly approached, saying she had warned her not to eat it, but the girl asked her to try it too because it was really tasty. As the girl offered a piece to her mother, the woman felt conflicted, thinking that she didn't believe it was some kind of cruel joke. So she decided to at least give it a chance and took a bite. Right after, she was impressed, wondering why it was so tasty. The woman, still surprised, questioned whether they had really made it purely out of kindness. She still vividly remembered when April arrived in the town. Her light pink, shining hair, skin white and clear as if dusted with pearl powder. And although she seemed to hide it, anyone could see that she looked like a noble woman just by laying eyes on her. Then they heard that a young woman like her would be running a cafe in a rural town like this. They said it wasn't good, because meanwhile, some people were busy trying to make a living every day, and they asked if she cooked the food herself, but they thought not, and that she would just play around and let her maids do all the work. The villagers showed hostility toward her immediately. They said she wouldn't last long in that place, and that they were sure she was arrogant and lazy like any other noble. Everyone mocked and ignored her, but the baker had seen her for who she really was, just for a moment. Just a girl diligently cleaning the cafe tables every morning. Even to the villagers who ignored her, she smiled and greeted them. And also, as the rumors said, Sarah had rejected her own nephew. So the young woman was taking care of Aisel. Contrary to the villagers' expectations, April was a sincere person. The baker then murmured that she thought she'd have to apologize later. Smiling at her daughter, she asked if she wanted to go to the cafe with her mother, and that in exchange for the buns, she would also bring some bread. Moments later, that same day, the baker and her daughter brought bread as thanks for April and Aisel. The girl received them with a big smile on her face. After that meeting, April was left baffled, wondering what the hell the baker had told the other residents. After all, her cafe was full of people. The number of customers had increased so much in just one day. A customer called out, wanting to place an order. He said that Miss Jo had highly recommended what she had tasted yesterday, so he would order the same. April, extremely happy, asked him to wait a moment while she prepared it. While making the coffee, she felt glad there was an espresso machine in this place. Let's pretend that makes total sense in a medieval world. Although the Empire had accepted it late, coffee had spread all over the world. Thanks to the development of magic and alchemy, the tools needed for coffee had been developed to the highest level of quality. Although, for some reason, steam mechanisms still hadn't been developed, which was a shame for limiting the menu. But later, when she had enough money, the protagonist planned to hire an alchemist or a mage to develop one. Then she served the coffee to a customer. And when the customer took a sip, she asked what kind of coffee that was, saying it was sweet and delicious. April replied that it was called a vanilla latte made with coffee mixed with milk and vanilla syrup, explaining that even if someone was new to trying coffee, they wouldn't feel overwhelmed by the taste. She proudly watched all her customers enjoying the coffee and desserts. Meanwhile, Aisel was saying goodbye to the customers who were leaving, wishing them a great day. The protagonist felt happy seeing that Aisel had recovered, but she thought that the people's interest in the cafe would probably only last one day. Still, it would be nice if tomorrow was just like today. And on the next day, several customers returned asking if the girl would be opening the cafe today as well. Surprised, she replied yes, but asked what had happened to everyone that morning, since they were at her door so early. The customers desperately wanted coffee. One of them said that with coffee, she didn't get tired while working. Another said her headache had gone away, and a man claimed that after drinking the coffee, his back pain had disappeared. They were begging her to give them coffee now. Nervous and overwhelmed, April asked them to calm down and wait a minute, and thought that coffee shouldn't be having that much of an effect. She said it was impossible to cure illnesses and that coffee wasn't medicine, although it was true that coffee had a stimulating effect. Regardless, they kept asking her for coffee. The protagonist then ran to prepare it, asking them to wait a minute. Moments later, she was completely exhausted from working so much, slumped over the table without strength. Aisel asked if she was okay. April replied yes, but in reality, her soul was about to leave her body. Despite the hardship, she had ended up earning some money and was happy. Getting up, the protagonist said that honestly, she was hungry and it was already getting late, calling him to go eat dinner. But suddenly, she heard someone at the door asking if there was anyone inside. She went to the door, wondering if there was really someone outside, thinking that voice didn't sound like a local resident. Opening the door, April asked who the person was, while Aisel watched from behind her, hiding. At that moment, a silver-haired man was standing seriously at the door, along with some guards. Seeing the color of his hair, she felt a bit anxious. April then turned to Aisel and told him he should go inside. However, the man said no, and that it would be better if the child stayed there too. Leaning in toward the girl, then asking what her relationship was with that child. Getting defensive, she said that before asking about someone else's identity, the man should introduce himself first. He laughed and apologized for that, saying April was right. Finally, saying his name was Claude Winterville. Upon hearing that, the protagonist was in shock, remembering his name. After all, that was the same Claude Winterville who, in the original story of the book, had killed her brutally. She freaked out internally, wondering why the hell he was standing in front of her. But interrupting her thoughts, Claude asked if before anything else, they could come in to talk properly, saying that this wasn't a conversation they should have while standing at the door. Inside, the three of them sat while the knights remained standing. April asked what was going on for them to have come from so far away. Claude explained that he was there to take the child. Not understanding that sudden statement, the protagonist asked him to hold on a second, asking if there was any explanation for that. The Duke then turned to a man, Claude, wearing the expression of someone who didn't even realize this was a problem. Noticing this, the knight thought he'd have to handle it, saying he would explain again. With a smile, he said it was a pleasure to meet her, introducing himself as Lloyd Hanger, assistant to the Duke of Winterville. At the moment, House Winterville was looking for a particular child. And with that, they had ended up coming to this place after receiving a report that a child matched the search criteria. Then apologizing, he asked what her relationship was with the boy, now that she thought about it. In the original novel, Claude was looking for his nephew who had been missing for a long time, with the intention of making him his successor. Aesel had unusually silver hair, just like Claude, so there was a high possibility that Aesel was his nephew. They even looked alike. The girl said that she was currently his temporary guardian, and asked Aesel to greet them. Embarrassed, the boy bowed his head and said hello. The Duke's assistant smiled back, calling him young master. And if the young boy didn't mind, they'd like to confirm if Aesel was really the one they were searching for, if possible, by conducting a test. Aesel didn't understand what he meant by test, but whispering, April said it wouldn't hurt to try, and that maybe he could find his father through this. Claude's expression darkened slightly upon hearing that. Aesel hesitated, but ended up agreeing. A hooded boy approached with a dagger. The Duke drew the blade from its sheath, then cut his own arm, while April angrily covered Aesel's eyes, wondering why he would draw blood in front of a child. Claude dripped the blood from his arm into a vessel, and right after, a mage healed his wound. The Duke then asked if she had a needle or something like that. After all, the boy was still a child, and a knife might be too much for him. Nervously, April replied that she had some and would get them, but worried, she asked how much blood they needed. The mage, smiling, replied that actually, just a single drop would be enough, which made her wonder why they didn't use a needle from the start. After all, that had even scared her. With the needle in hand, she told Aesel that it would sting a little, and he said it was okay. With his permission, April pricked his finger. Then Aesel dropped the blood into the same vessel the Duke had used, making the vessel begin to glow and change color. It was confirmed. Just as Claude had expected, this boy was his nephew. Aesel looked confused and asked if he was really his nephew. The Duke replied yes, pointing out that he was the lost son of his brother Leonard. The boy then asked if he might be able to meet his father too. However, Claude replied that unfortunately, no, explaining that Leonard had died about a year ago. Upon hearing this, Aesel froze for a moment. April thought he spoke of the child's father's death far too casually. Claude ignored that and continued, stating that now that it was confirmed he was his nephew, Winterville would take care of him from now on. And as his successor, Aesel would have access to anything he desired. At this moment, his assistant grew nervous, asking him to wait a second. After all, the Duke hadn't mentioned anything about making him his successor before. Claude asked if Lloyd had any objections, and he replied that if he chose the young master as his successor, there would be problems related to his marriage in the future. April realized this was true. It's rare for a woman to marry into a family with an heir, because even if that woman had a child, the chance of becoming a successor would be significantly lower. On the contrary, the risk of trying to destroy Aesel's life and eliminate him from competition was high. So the girl wondered if it was really a good idea to let the Duke take him, but Claude said not to worry, as he had no intention of getting married. His assistant panicked, asking what that meant, but the Duke said he wouldn't allow a fight for succession in his own territory. Either way, he would declare the child as his successor. This would happen officially once they went to the palace and tested him with a proper artifact. Interrupting, Aesel said that he had a name, not liking being called just the child throughout the conversation. But just as he was about to say something, someone else appeared. A man and Sarah entered the establishment. He said the Duke had arrived first. Worried, April wondered why that woman was there. Getting up, Aesel bowed to the man who arrived. Claude, baffled and with a serious look, asked what the Baron was looking for now, and questioned since when a Winterville bowed to a mere Baron. Hastily, the man knelt down and held Aesel's hand, saying that it was a mistake, explaining to the boy that he shouldn't be treated like that, now that he was the young master. Sarah said that was right, and that Aesel shouldn't simply bow to anyone, pointing out that now he would be Aesel Winterville. Claude asked who she was supposed to be. Bowing slightly, she said it was a pleasure to meet the Duke, and that her name was Sarah, Aesel's aunt. The woman continued, claiming to be his only family and lying about getting along well with him, saying they were so close the boy got anxious without her around. April quickly realized the lie. After all, the woman had abandoned the boy in her care and simply left. Smiling, she said that if it was all right, she'd like to go to Winterville with them. But her speech was quickly cut off by Claude, who asked if by chance she thought he was stupid or something. Standing up, the Duke asked if she wasn't the one who had abandoned that child right there and disappeared. Thus, he stated that he was only here to take his nephew. Sarah shouted, telling Claude to wait a minute and asked if he was saying it was okay for Azel to feel anxious. But he said it didn't matter, pointing out that anyone from Winterville would adapt easily. Noticing that Azel was restless, April asked if they shouldn't hear his opinion. Maybe he didn't want to go to the Winterville mansion like that. Sarah interrupted her, doing the only thing she had done so far, yelling. She asked what nonsense the girl was talking about, pointing out that, obviously, he wanted to go. However, April said that the opinion of the child in question was the most important. Calling out to him, the protagonist asked what the boy would like to do. Gripping his clothes tightly, at first he was very nervous. But gathering his courage, Azel confidently said that he didn't want to go, because he wanted to keep living there with April. On a pleasant morning with clear weather, the smell of coffee beans in the morning was especially delightful. For the villagers who had suddenly grown used to coffee, breakfast had become a daily routine. For the customers who visited that morning too, she had roasted many coffee beans, but she was baffled by what had happened. There were no customers. Everything was so empty it felt like she was being hit by a downpour. She wondered if all of this was because of that damn Duke. Not understanding why he was sitting there, meanwhile, Claude was calmly reading in a corner of the establishment. April approached and said it was going to be difficult if he stayed there, since the Duke was scaring away all her customers. Confused, Claude asked how that was possible. The girl angrily wondered whether he was really asking because he didn't know or just mocking her. The protagonist then said that because of the Duke, customers wouldn't come. And if he wanted to persuade Azel, he should find another way. Claude said he was confident this time, and that if she brought Azel, he would try to persuade him. Already tired of the situation, April asked if he had any idea how many times she had already called him, but the boy simply didn't want to come out of the room, asking the Duke to just try again another time. Besides, she thought that since she knew the original story, the girl felt very uncomfortable being in the same room as someone who had, theoretically, already killed her once. Claude said that, by the way, she had mentioned there was a problem with business because of him, so he asked if it was alright if he stayed there as a customer. April said that wasn't what she meant, but was quickly interrupted. And pointing to the menu, the Duke said that solving this problem would be quite simple, then asked her to bring him everything on the menu. While preparing the coffee for Claude, the protagonist thought she was even happy with the sales. However, she wondered if the Duke was really planning to let things go again like he did today. Previously, she had warned him that making everything on the menu would take a long time. In response to that, Claude simply said that for today, it would just be 10 Americanos, enough to give any living being an arrhythmia. Even so, she thought maybe it was convenient, thinking that if this really increased her sales, she could just let him do whatever he wanted for a while. By the way, she never thought her first Americano would be for a Duke. Although April found him a bit annoying, she still hoped he would like her coffee, the coffee cup lightly glowing in the background. She then brought the Americano along with pancakes to Claude, but he asked what that was, saying he hadn't ordered it. April quickly explained that the dish was on the house, and that it was the first time a customer had ordered 10 drinks at once in her cafe. By the way, she asked what she should do with the other 9 cups. Looking to the side, Claude asked her to wait a moment. Then, noticing his guards outside, they all came in and sat down, occupying the cafe's seats. The Duke said the remaining cups should be given to each of those men. Soon after, everyone started enjoying the coffee. Even so, there were still 3 cups left, and the protagonist wondered what to do with them. At that moment, by sheer coincidence, 3 women appeared at the shop asking for coffee. However, when the women saw the Duke, they were immediately surprised, apologizing and saying they didn't know he was there. Claude said it was all right, and that they should do whatever made them feel comfortable. They tried to decline the Duke's offer, but finally gave in when he said he didn't mind. So despite their nervousness, they entered. Watching all the commotion, April found it extremely irritating, thinking he wasn't the Duke of her cafe. Claude then told the girl that she could give the remaining 3 cups to the young women. Agreeing a bit awkwardly, the protagonist quickly served them their coffees. They looked confused for a moment. After all, they hadn't even ordered anything yet. The protagonist informed them that this was an American-style coffee and pointed out that the Duke himself had bought it for them. The girl asked them to enjoy the drink. Also, smiling, she explained that an Americano could be a bit hard to drink, and if the taste was too strong, they could add a little syrup to sweeten it. One of them said she'd at least try it first. April thought that if it was someone's first time trying coffee, an Americano right away might be a bit too strong for their taste. Right after the woman took a sip, the protagonist asked if they would like to add the syrup. One of them said she liked it, while another, a little embarrassed, said she would like some, feeling the bitterness was too strong. After that, whenever customers saw Claude, they tried to escape at the first opportunity. Despite his threatening tone asking them to come in, they kept hesitating but eventually entered the cafe. Claude's presence created a strange atmosphere for a moment, but as soon as the coffee was served, that feeling quickly disappeared. And before she realized it, the cafe was once again filled with the smell of coffee and the buzz of people. By late afternoon, Claude was getting ready to leave, but before going, he said he'd be back tomorrow. The protagonist asked why he was coming back, and the Duke simply said he hadn't been able to see Azel today. April said she would do her best to help him reach the boy, even if the Duke didn't come back tomorrow. But while finishing her sentence, Claude interrupted her, saying he had forgotten to pay the bill. Then he asked her to accept this, placing a dozen gold coins on the table. Shocked, the protagonist wondered why it looked like there was way more than there should be. April then asked if that wasn't too much. Claude pointed out that it was because of him. After all, due to his presence, the girl had barely been able to work properly, and asked if that amount was enough to cover the trouble. He also asked April not to refuse and just accept it as compensation. Nervous, the protagonist wondered if this was how rich people lived, nearly blinded by the endless shine. She said that if that was the case, she would accept without hesitation, making him pleased. As he left, the Duke said he would be back tomorrow. Going to the room, April asked if Azel was hungry, calling him for dinner. Wrapped in a pile of blankets like he was hiding, Azel peeked out, asking if the man had already left. The protagonist laughed at the way Azel referred to the Duke. Sitting on the bed, the girl said he shouldn't call him that. After all, the man was his uncle. Besides, last time he was here, the Duke called him his nephew. But Azel retorted, asking if she didn't find it ridiculous to think he was a Duke's nephew. April asked why he thought that, and said that actually, she believed Azel and the Duke were quite similar. Looking down, the boy said he didn't really know. She realized that Azel was still a little unsettled, so changing the subject, she asked if he wanted to have dinner first. Later, after finishing his meal, the boy thanked her for the food. The protagonist asked if it was good, and he quickly confirmed that it was. Staring at him for a moment, the girl paused to think. Then she decided to bring the subject back to the table, calling for Azel. April asked if he really didn't want to go with Claude. Sad, Azel asked if she was trying to send him away. Approaching and gently taking his hand, she denied it, saying obviously not, pointing out that he knew that wasn't what she meant. April just hoped Azel would stay in a good environment. Calming him, the girl also pointed out that if he wished so, if he didn't want to go with the Duke, he could stay with her for as long as needed. Azel asked her if she would still cook his meals every day, but the girl reminded him that technically he was paying the price every day. April reminded him of their last deal, that he wouldn't use money to eat there. Excited, the boy pointed out that she had asked for flowers. She said that was exactly it, and so he didn't have to worry about anything. He could take it easy. Then the boy said that starting tomorrow, he would pick even prettier flowers. Right after, he ran off excitedly, but the protagonist remained at the table, worried and wondering if this would really be okay. And remembering Claude's words, she wondered if things would stay this way even if she didn't send Azel to him. At night and in another location, Lloyd was apologizing to his lord. He had made sure to rent the best room in the area, but even so, they were still in a rural region, so the quality was a little poor by noble standards. The Duke said it would do for now and that there was nothing they could do anyway. The man asked if the Duke shouldn't return to the capital first. Meanwhile, he would stay there and do his best to persuade the young master and bring him to Winterville. The Duke explained that since it was about his nephew, he would handle it personally. So it was fine, and Lloyd had nothing to worry about regarding that. Until recently, the Duke had been living in the capital searching for Azel. The territory of Winterville was located on the northernmost mountain sustained by the Empire. It was a place full of monsters until he had risen to the rank of Duke. He frequently participated in monster subjugation missions while his brother Leonard was ill, and because of that, he was used to camping in cold and inhospitable places. Besides, it didn't matter the place. The lack of sleep never bothered him. Saying he needed to rest, the Duke said they would stop there and that Lloyd could leave him now. The man bowed, saying that in that case, he would light some incense to help him sleep. After doing so and covering his nose, the man took his leave, asking his lord to rest well. It happened that the Duke had incredible physical capabilities, but this was both a blessing and a curse for the Winterville family. As if to prove the legend that the Winterville family had made a pact with demons, the direct descendant of the family was born with monstrous physical abilities. However, in exchange for this ability, demonic energy gradually built up in his body. If his demonic energy accumulated too much, he would become more sensitive, his 5 senses developing in an inhuman way. And because of that, his body would react easily to even the smallest sound, even while sleeping. Thus, it had been years since he was truly able to fall into a deep sleep. Annoyed, Claude thought that the incense wasn't working much anymore, but it was still better than nothing. The next morning, Claude awoke with the sun on his face, wondering if it was already morning. He quickly sat up, perplexed, showing off abs that weren't that defined at all. Shocked, he questioned whether he had really had a good night's sleep. However, to his confusion, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. And because of his abilities, he wasn't very hungry. He hadn't even eaten anything since leaving the capital, ruling out the possibility that some food had helped. So there was only one possible variable left. It must have been the coffee he drank at April's cafe. Laughing, he said he should probably visit that cafe again. Upon arriving, the protagonist greeted the arrival of a customer. And noticing the Duke was there, she addressed him by his title. Straightening the counter, she explained that Assel hadn't gotten up yet, asking if he wanted her to call him. The Duke approached and then slammed his hand on the table. With a serious look, he questioned the coffee he drank yesterday, asking what exactly the woman had put in it. A little confused, the protagonist explained that if it was about the Americano she had made, there was nothing unusual in it. Intrigued, he pressed again, asking if that was really true. But the girl firmly confirmed, pointing out that she had just made it with espresso and water. In other words, it was just coffee. Still a bit curious, the Duke asked what kind of water she had used. The girl said she had used the village's regular water. In her mind, she wondered why he was asking this kind of thing, believing something strange might be going on. Turning around, Claude stated that he needed to check her kitchen for himself, which shocked the protagonist, asking him to wait a moment. After all, if he entered like that out of nowhere. But suddenly someone shouted, telling him not to even think about it, pointing out that he shouldn't harass Miss April. It was Assel shouting, having just gotten out of bed. Both paused for a moment, looking at the boy. Assel placed himself between the two, asking the Duke to apologize to her. Confused, Claude asked the child to wait a moment. After all, he just wanted to investigate something. But he was interrupted again, with the child insisting that he apologize. A little disturbed, the Duke said fine, and that he had no intention of embarrassing her. So he was apologizing for having been rude. The protagonist said it was all right, explaining she had just gotten a little startled. In her mind, the girl thought she didn't expect him to apologize so kindly. After all, most nobles she'd met so far were rather disoriented and disrespectful. When she saw Claude introduce himself, emphasizing that he was a Winterville, the girl thought he'd be just like them. Still a bit awkward, April asked why he had questioned her earlier, asking if perhaps the coffee had tasted strange. The Duke replied that wasn't the case, and that her coffee was simply delicious. Finding that to be a good thing, she still didn't understand why or what the reason was. But Claude pointed out that he wanted to verify something, and asked if she could make a cup of coffee in front of him. Sometime later in the kitchen, the Duke and his aide were in front of the protagonist. A bit annoyed, she asked if all she had to do was prepare coffee while they watched. With his arms crossed, Claude nodded, while Lloyd looked a bit awkward. After all, he had been dragged in while just waiting around, wondering what the hell was going on there. The protagonist said it wasn't an impossible request, but she didn't understand the reason for it. The Duke explained that he just wanted to see how the coffee was made. His companion was a little dumbfounded. After all, he didn't think his lord would suddenly be interested in learning how to make coffee out of absolutely nowhere. Hearing all of this, the protagonist said that in that case, they could feel free to take a closer look. But she still didn't understand why the Duke would come up with such a flimsy lie. So she began to prepare the coffee. First, putting the kettle on to boil water. Meanwhile, she placed the beans in the coffee grinder until they turned to powder, inserting the ground beans into the portafilter, and compacting them with the tamper. Now, all she needed to do was insert the portafilter into the machine and brew the espresso. Just that. Noticing that the two were watching her impressed, April wondered if making coffee was really that amazing. But in the end, she thought it made a bit of sense, since they had probably never seen someone making coffee this way. Finally, she added the boiled water to the cup. It was just pouring it, and the extracted espresso was ready. At last, as the coffee was finished, the protagonist hoped it would be delicious. Suddenly, the Duke grabbed her hand, asking what she had just done now. She was confused and wondered what she had done, since from her point of view, she didn't believe she had done anything. Astonished, the Duke explained that when he closed his eyes at the last moment, he felt like she did something. But not understanding, the protagonist said the only thing she did was wish that it would taste delicious. And the Duke asked if she had conjured some kind of ability. April didn't understand, wondering what the hell he meant by conjuring something, explaining that she was just praying for it to taste good. The protagonist remembered that in the original story, April was able to use magic. However, she didn't even know how to do that. So why was the Duke saying something like that? Firmly, still holding her wrist, the Duke asked what that light was that he saw just a moment ago. In disbelief, she pointed out that she hadn't seen anything like that, and that there was no way it had happened. Lloyd then stepped in, saying he had also seen it. A light had appeared and seeped into the coffee. Pressuring the girl, Claude said she better be honest about this. Claude pointed out that she should answer him soon, as he was already running out of patience. Asking what the hell she had put in the coffee to make him sleep, the girl didn't understand what he was talking about, not getting what he meant about putting him to sleep. Then, April snapped, yelling that she really had no idea what the Duke was talking about. A little later, still at the cafe, the protagonist was sitting, surrounded by the Duke, Lloyd, and a hooded young man. The mage was saying they probably wanted him to confirm whether the woman in front of him had magical powers or not. With arms crossed, the Duke confirmed that yes, asking if that was possible. The protagonist in the background, completely unsure what to do, and scared, she prayed that he would say it wasn't the case. After all, if it was revealed that April had healing abilities, she might end up like in the original story. That is, 6 feet under. Besides, that person had a strange atmosphere around him for a while now, which was scary enough by itself. Saying that it was possible, the young man asked if he should try, while the protagonist mentally begged him not to. He asked the girl to extend her hand for a moment, which April did basically in tears, her hope for survival shrinking in her mind. Upon touching her hand, a bright light began to shine, surprising the girl. She didn't understand at first, but while the man finished, the Duke asked what the result of the test was. Astonished, the boy said that wasn't it, pointing out that the girl, moreover, had a rare white attribute. Realizing it was healing power, the man looked down on her, while the protagonist sweated a little. The hooded boy then said that it was exactly that. Although very similar to holy power, it was still a healing ability. Placing his hand thoughtfully on his chin, the Duke asked if it was possible for someone to use magic without even knowing it. While praying for her life, the girl hoped the mage would answer yes. Thankfully, that was the case. And the girl sighed in relief, thinking she'd probably survive. The Duke's aide asked how, and the mage explained that the girl had probably been born with it, also pointing out that of all the white attribute mages he had met in his life, she had the highest potential. With that level of talent, she would just need to dedicate herself to something and the magic would manifest on its own. But the girl didn't understand what he meant by dedication. In the end, he explained that just having a heart that wished for others to be healed would be enough to channel that desire somewhere. Then the protagonist realized that this had probably happened while she was preparing the coffee. April then remembered moments when people came to ask for more coffee to drink, saying it had helped with fatigue and body aches. Even Aisel had gotten better after drinking her hot chocolate. The girl realized that she had indeed been using magic unconsciously, which left her a bit astonished. Pausing to think for a moment, April realized this was probably the reason behind Claude's commotion, and that could mean his insomnia was cured after drinking her coffee. Kids, don't try drinking coffee at night to copy this. The girl remembered that Claude's insomnia was a very severe side effect of the accumulation of demonic energy over a long period of time, being a serious chronic illness he had always lived with. The accumulation of that energy always caused many problems with his temper and made him lose control at times. To try to get rid of the buildup of that energy, Claude frequently used blessings from a priest regularly. However, that meant if the temple wanted to, they could have the Duke of Winterville himself as one of their puppets. After all, Claude was already immensely dependent on their healing. If someone like him wanted to escape the temple's influence, April's healing abilities would inevitably become necessary. But suddenly someone said all of that was nonsense. The Duke then asked if they knew how many white mages they had met all this time. They had all tried something, but nothing worked on him. And besides that, he pointed out that the very person who hadn't even learned to use magic properly had cured his insomnia, and that didn't make any sense to him. The mage argued that it had really worked this time, and that meant her magic level should at least be above average. The Duke countered, saying that this woman didn't even know about her own abilities until now, questioning whether her talents weren't being extremely wasted in a rural area like this. All of this seemed too perfect to be just a coincidence, wondering how he could believe something like that. All these arguments were crushing the protagonist's conscience, and the real reason was that she was only and exclusively trying to stay away from him, the man who would have killed her in the original story. The Duke's aide then stated that the two should stop for now. And trying to sum it all up, Lloyd explained that she at least had talent, so that meant she didn't even have knowledge of her own magical potential. He asked if April had learned to use magic at any point, which the girl quickly denied. In a friendly tone, he asked if in that case it wasn't under anyone's orders that she had just cast that magic. Frightened, she said obviously not, wondering how he could suggest something so dangerous with a smile on his face. Lloyd continued, saying that his lord had probably misunderstood, that it was all just a misunderstanding, so he could stop now. And jokingly, the aide said if they kept going, they might end up seeing Aisel's bad side. Meanwhile, the boy was glaring fiercely at him from behind a table. Thus calming things down, he then said they should talk properly, and the protagonist agreed. Then Lloyd called her Miss April and stated that he would like to hire her, a sentence that left her confused. Initially, Initially, the girl didn't understand what Lloyd meant and wondered if they just wanted her to make a cup of coffee every day for the Duke. The man agreed, saying that was exactly it. After all, she would be the only one who could cure his insomnia, so that was the offer. But if she accepted the job, the girl would have to return to the capital, and she could end up getting involved with Zenon again, which was pretty dangerous. If Claude even found out she had been his fiancé in the past, she would also end up being a suspect if Zenon ever tried to kill the Duke someday. With all that in mind, she was feeling a little anxious. And apologizing, April said she would have to decline the offer, and she even implied that she wasn't 100% sure it was due to her abilities that the Duke's sleep had improved. Claude asked if he could try to prove those abilities. And when April asked what he was going to do, he ended up picking up the cup and drinking a bit of the coffee. Putting the cup back down, he said there was magic in that coffee too. So, if he stayed around, they would find out the result tonight. While the protagonist tried to argue, the Duke interrupted her, saying he wouldn't drink anything else tonight to make sure he could verify the coffee. And when he returned the next morning, he would tell her the results. As they were leaving, the protagonist asked them to wait a moment, but she was completely ignored, being left behind without being able to say anything. Basically, that day, Claude had dropped a bomb right before leaving. The girl was very anxious, and even while working, her mind couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, wondering what would happen if the coffee had really worked. She questioned whether she should just run away. And Aesel, noticing her strange behavior, asked if everything was all right. Even at night, she still couldn't stop thinking about what happened, thinking Claude would do everything in his power to find them, wherever they went. The next day, the protagonist had huge dark circles under her eyes, while Claude, radiant, greeted her with a good morning. Apparently, she was the one who ended up losing sleep instead of him. Claude then said that this was really confirmed now. Her coffee really was the reason the Duke had managed to sleep better. A little downcast, the protagonist thought she had no reason to say anything else, and asked that they first come inside. The Duke and his aide sat at the table while April served them. Placing a cup on the table, the girl stated that, just as she had explained yesterday, she was still willing to decline the offer. Claude asked if she would still say that, even with a salary of 300 gold coins, shocking the protagonist with the amount. And doing the math in her head, she realized it was an absurd amount for just one cup of coffee. But the girl realized it wasn't just about the drink. Curing Claude's insomnia meant something much deeper. In the original story, the female protagonist had managed to cure him. Just like April, the woman was also a white attribute mage. And by helping him with treatment, they ended up falling in love. But there was still about a year until the time the book started. So she considered working for a year, earning 3,000 gold coins in the end. Noticing her hesitation, the Duke pointed out that they could still adopt a confidentiality clause, adding 200 gold coins per month. The amount of 500 coins left her speechless, her heart almost skipping a beat. With all that money, she could live her life never worrying about money again. But even so, the girl couldn't just give up on her dream like that. So April told the Duke that her dream was to have her own cafe, not to become a personal barista. Standing up, Claude said that if that was the case, she could have said so earlier, asking her what she thought about opening a coffee shop in the capital. Startled, April asked if she could really do that. The Duke pointed out that yes, she could, explaining that the girl could work normally in the cafe during the day, and all he wanted was just a cup of coffee before going to sleep. The aide drank his coffee calmly while the two debated, apparently already used to Claude's negotiations. The protagonist argued that it was too much money, and Claude said it was a fair price for her skills, adding that he would also provide the funds for the cafe. The Duke concluded, stating that the name and profit would be entirely hers. That was the final blow. Everything was just too perfect. The protagonist's emotions took a critical hit upon hearing that, placing her magically still full cup on the table. The man thought everything was already settled. The protagonist was finally knocked out. Gathering her strength, April said she would definitely do it. Smiling, Claude said he was glad she had changed her mind. But the protagonist quickly intervened, saying that before that she had one condition, asking if he just wanted the coffee and nothing else. And a bit irritated, he wondered what on earth he was thinking. Since he had no other intentions, he just wanted a bit of coffee. That said, she asked that all those words be put into a written contract, and the Count agreed, saying he would do so. Aesel, who had been watching from a bit of a distance, caught everyone's attention. And determined, he explained that he would also like to go along. A bit astonished, the Duke stood up, asking if he really wanted that, and whether things would be okay regarding his aunt. The boy quickly said it was fine, since Sarah didn't really care much about him anyway. So shyly, he asked again if he could go too. The Duke approached him, crouching down to eye level, saying of course he could. Aesel got a little annoyed, and pouting, he complained that his name was Aesel, and not just Kid, like he was being called. Patting his head, Claude agreed. calling him by name. Suddenly, someone shouted that all of that was pretty ridiculous. The one saying that was the boy's aunt, of course. She questioned if they were planning to take Azel without even getting her permission, pointing out that regardless of him being a noble, that would be extremely unacceptable. The protagonist was having a déjà vu, wondering where she had seen something like that before, since apparently Sarah seemed incapable of existing without yelling or complaining. The woman kept talking, breathless, complaining that she had been raising the boy alone for the past 3 years, pointing out that no one there knew how hard it had been for her all this time. And because of the boy, she hadn't even been able to think about marrying again. Hearing that, the Count called for his assistant Lloyd, who immediately extended his hand with a sealed pouch. Confused, Sarah asked what that was. Lloyd explained that it was a reward for having taken care of Azel all that time, claiming that it was enough money to satisfy her. With a serious expression, the Duke pointed out that from the moment she accepted that money, Sarah should never appear in front of the boy again. And that money would basically be her reward for this request. Holding the money in her hands, the woman agreed, a little calmer. Turning to Azel, she called out to him. Sarah explained that he had also had a hard time living with her. The boy was a bit surprised to hear her say something like that. As she left, she explained that Azel should go and live well. Seeing that, the protagonist wondered if Sarah actually had a long-standing affection for Azel. April believed the woman would react differently, even thinking Sarah would feel relieved by this, treating Azel as a burden. But all she felt during that final farewell was that the woman seemed extremely lonely. Azel then called out to the Duke, and he asked what had happened. The boy then asked if he could call him uncle, which left Claude a little surprised. But complaining that it was quite sudden, the Duke told him to do as he pleased. Calling Azel a cheeky kid and flicking his forehead, Azel complained again, saying he wasn't a child and that he had a name. And he also asked why he had been hit. The Duke then explained that he'd call him whatever he wanted. Laughing, the protagonist thought the two seemed very close, as if they had grown up together. Unlike this, in the original story, Azel and Claude had a much more distant relationship. Claude was a cold uncle with no affection for family, and the boy was a rude nephew with no charm at all. They were anything but a close family. But looking now, the two really looked like a good family. That night, the protagonist and Azel were in the kitchen, and looking at the package in the girl's hand, he asked what that was. April explained that it was a package of butter, and the boy asked why April had bought so much butter if they were leaving tomorrow. She explained that she wanted to make something for the villagers before they left. Surprised, Azel asked what it would be. Smiling and joking, April asked if he wouldn't like to guess. Starting the meal prep, the protagonist explained that first, they needed pre-processed walnuts, which made the boy curious about what the term pre-processed meant. April explained that walnuts, as they were, needed to be stored separately from their shells. Otherwise, the inner shell would go rancid, which would change the flavor. Next, he asked what the word rancid meant, making the girl laugh a little. Before that, she asked if he wanted a bite first, and Azel tasted it. The protagonist then asked what it tasted like, and he said it was acceptable, but a little bitter. So she explained that this was the rancid flavor she had mentioned. The boy then asked if after doing that process, the bitter taste would go away. And the protagonist explained that yes, and that they would compare them as soon as she finished pre-processing them. Next, April explained how to pre-process walnuts. First, you had to chop them into appropriate sizes and cook them in a pan for 2 minutes. Then you would wash them to remove any impurities that might remain, using cold water. Soon after, you would spread them evenly on a wide baking tray and place them in the oven, letting them roast for 15 minutes. And finally, the pre-processing would be done and you'd have a batch of walnuts without that bitter taste. Blowing on a walnut, the protagonist asked if Azel would like to try it and tell her how it tasted. He now said it was totally different from before. The girl said that, however, they shouldn't eat too much of it, or it might cause a bit of a stomachache. The next step of the recipe would be cutting the butter into pieces the size of a pinky fingernail and placing them in a bowl, adding sugar and mashing them using a spatula. The girl thought that at times like this, she really wished she had a mixer, like a whipped cream machine. Since the Duke said he would support the opening of her cafe, she could ask him to introduce her to an alchemist. But she thinks about rejecting the idea, since alchemists usually cost a lot, turning her focus back to the recipe. When the butter and sugar are mixed until they reach a soft consistency, she adds an egg and continues mixing. Then, adding flour and salt and a little baking powder. And of course, you needed to sift the powder before mixing everything. Then, when the dough is mixed and prepared, they should add the pre-processed walnuts along with chocolate chips and mix well. And finally, the recipe would be ready. In the end, the protagonist, a bit stunned, realizes she was missing something more important. In her mind, she hopes that everyone who eats these cookies will be healthy and happy. A bright light appears in her hands, illuminating the cookie jar. Then, after shaping the dough, it was finally ready and just needed to be baked in the oven. The sight of the cookies leaves the boy amazed, and he asks if he could eat at least one. A bit unsure how to respond, the protagonist thinks there's a lot of chocolate in them, so she needs to wait for them to cool down a bit. So April decides she'll give him just one cookie, which should be fine. She explains that he could take one, but since it's already late, Azel would only eat one, which the boy happily agrees to. The next day, the protagonist and Azel walked through the village handing out the cookies they had made the night before. A woman thanked her, saying she would enjoy them well, and the protagonist said she didn't do anything special, thanking them for everything they had done over time. The woman pointed out that they should come back later to visit her, as she would make delicious bread for them. She and her little girl said goodbye to the boy, asking Azel to take care. He replied, telling them to take care as well. The protagonist was feeling that something was strange. After all, to her surprise, everyone was reacting well to her. So, saying that now they should go, April thinks that maybe this town had grown a bit on her. After everything they handed out, only 2 little bags of cookies remained, and Azel looked at her with a bit of interest. April asked if the boy would like to take them, but he quickly refused. A bit confused, the boy asked if April could give him the remaining cookies, since there was someone he really wanted to give them to. She said that was fine, but asked the boy to be careful and return safely. Later, it started raining in the village, and the two walked with umbrellas toward the Duke. Claude was waiting for them, asking if they had finished everything they needed to do. The protagonist explained that yes, and that they were returning. April recalled that many things had changed from the original story. She had broken off her engagement with Zenon Olsen, and Azel and Claude had managed to develop a closer relationship, the boy even giving him the last remaining bag of cookies. But despite that, she couldn't stop worrying a little. But trying to be positive, she was sure everything would be fine once they arrived in the capital, riding in a carriage drawn by 2 white horses. From inside, the protagonist thought that having money was truly amazing. After all, they arrived in the capital in just a few minutes through a mana gate, wondering how rich the Wintervilles really were. The protagonist and the boy looked out of the carriage, finding everything so cool, while the Duke simply watched them without reacting. Shortly after, Azel pointed out that there were many people outside, and April said that, come to think of it, it was the boy's first time in the capital. Agreeing with that, he asked the Duke if that was where his house was too. Claude confirmed that yes, and said that from now on it would be his home too, pointing out that they should arrive soon. Passing through the gates of a property, Claude got out of the carriage. In front of him, several servants waited to welcome him back. The Duke then held Azel in his arms, surprising him and lifting him from the carriage. And placing him on the ground, Claude apologized if he had scared Azel, and the boy said it was fine, finally thanking him. The protagonist thought that for some reason that made her heart skip a beat, and Claude suddenly extended his hand to her. April initially didn't understand what was happening, or why he was extending his hand to her, wondering if he would help her too. The Duke asked why she wasn't coming and if something was wrong. But in her mind, the girl asked to wait a moment. The protagonist wasn't sure if the April from the story had ever held hands like that with a man, and she herself had never held anyone's hand in her life. The girl was afraid she wouldn't even be able to control her anxiety. Claude chuckles lightly, and taking her hand, he pulls her close. With her by his side, the Duke ironically asks if she wasn't seriously getting shy right now, a line that leaves the butlers speechless. Still holding his hand, the protagonist's face turns red, a little embarrassed. April tries to hide it, saying that, actually, she wasn't. One of the butlers nearly faints at the scene, and a maid tries to bring him back to his senses. The protagonist asks if the Duke was messing with her right now, but the butler then draws their attention, signaling that his master was welcome back, with all the servants bowing. Claude asks if they had prepared everything he had requested. In the epilogue of Sarah's story, she wondered where that sudden rain had come from, complaining about being completely soaked. Then the woman notices a bag of cookies hanging on the doorknob. Taking it, Sarah begins to read the message that was written. In it, Azel said thank you to his aunt, expressing gratitude for everything she had done so far. Holding that and almost crying, she thinks that she ended up losing her chance to apologize. Back at the mansion, the butler explains that, just as he had commanded, they had prepared the emerald room and the guest room. Claude then says they did a good job. The butler turns to Azel, asking who this young man might be. The Duke then explains that this child was his nephew, Azel Winterville. The servant then points out that the resemblance between him and Master Leonard was quite visible. Curious, the butler also asks who this young lady was, probably thinking she might be a romantic prospect for the Duke. Claude explains that this was Miss April, pointing out that she would be taking care of Aesel and planned to open a cafe on the same street as the Winterville house, then asking that they treat her with respect. When asked if his mother had not come with the boy, the Duke explains that unfortunately she had passed away 3 years ago. The butler says he understands and that the two must be tired from the trip, and would then escort them to their rooms. Claude also points out that they should go to the Imperial Palace the next day, and that if she needed anything, she only had to ask the house butler. Approaching and grabbing his sleeve, April asks the Duke to wait a second. And when he does, the protagonist explains that actually they needed to discuss something about the cafe right now. Without much enthusiasm, the Duke doesn't understand at first, but the girl insists. She explains that she needed some tools to use in the cafe, and Claude says in that case she just had to make a list and send it to Lloyd and he would take care of everything. But she says it couldn't be bought. It had to be custom made just for that. The Duke gets confused. And a little nervous, April says that in short she would need an alchemist. Normally, baristas and bakers were recruited by posting a job opening, but an alchemist was a bit more complicated. For starters, it wasn't easy to hire one just like that, and there were only a few of them. And it was especially difficult to find someone capable of creating the tools she needed. Adding all that up, the cost of an alchemist would be astronomical. While Claude was deep in thought, the protagonist wonders if this was an irrational request. Trying to ease the situation, she explains that she clearly knew an alchemist would be expensive. However, she points out that the tool in question was necessary, leaving them with little choice. Gesturing for her to calm down, the Duke asks if she really thought he would reject her request, just because of the cost. And a little awkwardly, she asks if that wouldn't be the case. Feeling unworthy, the Duke jokes, saying he didn't know she cared so much about the finances of House Winterville. The protagonist explains that it wasn't exactly that. She just didn't know how much he was willing to invest in her cafe. After all, the salary she would be receiving was already relatively high. Smiling, Claude says that he had already stated he would handle the financial support for everything she needed, and that her salary and the investments for the cafe were separate matters. Referring to Lloyd, he asks if a woman named Hannah Turner was currently in the state, and the assistant then explains that probably yes. The Duke then asks him to summon her to the capital as soon as possible. And with his arms crossed, he explains to the protagonist that her alchemist would arrive soon, and that she shouldn't worry about money and should just do what she wanted. A little embarrassed, the protagonist thanks him. As he walks up the stairs, Claude explains that he was saying goodbye for now, as he had work to do. Lloyd approaches the protagonist and says it was pretty clear that his lord liked her a little. Curious, the protagonist asks if the Duke really liked her. And to Lloyd's frustration and delight, he explains that apparently it really seemed that way. If it were someone else, he simply wouldn't have laughed like that. Anyway, Lloyd says he would let her know when the alchemist arrived, which should take a few days. Almost crying, she thanks him for that. Then Aesel approaches with the butler, saying they should go to their rooms now, which the girl agrees to. The butler then explains that the young master would stay on the 4th floor, while Miss April would get a room on the 3rd. He said this as he showed them the entire luxurious estate. A bit embarrassed, Aesel says he would like to stay in a room closer to hers. But the protagonist explains that since he was the Duke's nephew instead of just a guest, there might be nothing they could do about it. But she says Aesel shouldn't worry because she would visit his room often. A little awkwardly, the butler explains that that was exactly the case, and that the Duke had instructed him to guide Miss April wherever she wanted to go. Cheerful, Aesel asks if that meant the protagonist would continue staying there with him. She explains that of course she would, even though she thinks it won't be forever. It wasn't something that needed to be said now, after all. She didn't want to hurt Aesel. So April says they should go take a look at his room, and holding her hand, he agrees. The next day, in the morning, someone points out that Aesel looked very handsome in those new clothes. He, a bit embarrassed, asks if that was true. The protagonist then explains that obviously it was, and he even looked like a noble with them. The boy then asks what a noble was, since he didn't know what it meant. Raising her finger to explain, April says it meant he looked like a young master who had been raised with a lot of respect. A bit astonished, the boy asks how he could possibly be compared to that. Arriving at the room, Claude asks what they meant by that, questioning who would dare belittle a member of the Winterville family. Looking at him, the protagonist blushes a little upon seeing him enter. Noticing this, he asks why she was staring at him so much, which startles her. Trying to escape the situation, she says it was nothing, but she still feels her heart beating like crazy. Literally, she had only spent one day in the Duke's house and was already falling in love. Kneeling down to talk to the boy, Claude explains that he would wait patiently until he got used to all this. However, Asel should never again belittle himself or put himself down like that. Embarrassed and mumbling, the boy apologizes for causing trouble. But the Duke doesn't understand, saying it wasn't anything like that, and that if someone ever says something like that to him, he should tell Claude immediately. And while stating that he would personally rip the mouths of those who said anything to Asel, the Duke pauses for a moment, pointing out that actually he would handle the situation with a little more care. Placing his hand on the boy's head, Claude continues, saying that if he didn't value himself, others wouldn't either. So he should make sure to give himself the dignity he deserved. With a renewed expression, the boy agrees, calling him uncle. The Duke then asks if everyone was ready, and the protagonist explains that yes, and that Asel was already fully dressed. Claude says Asel looked good, but he was actually asking about April. The comment catches her off guard, and she asks why. Claude explains that she would be going with them to the Imperial Palace, which leaves the girl extremely shocked, as she hadn't been informed of that. After all, she thought only the Duke and Asel would be going to the palace. Arms crossed, Claude asks if she didn't hear him properly, saying that he had told her to get ready too. April, awkwardly, says she hadn't heard anything about that. But suddenly, two maids approach, grabbing her by the arms, dragging her along with them. The girl doesn't understand anything as she's kidnapped by them faster than she can process. One of the maids yells, saying to, "Please leave this to them." And then another says the girl would be ready in no time. A little later, hearing the sound of footsteps, Claude asks if April was ready now. Asel is enchanted by her new outfit while the Duke remains impassive. Still confused, she asks why she was being taken along to the palace. The Duke points out that she really had no awareness at all, which makes her uneasy, pointing out that she couldn't even see how nervous Asel was. Claude asks if she was really going to send a shy child alone. She says that wouldn't be the case after all. Asel wouldn't be alone since he was with his uncle. With his arms crossed, the Duke explains that it was obvious he was the guardian, but it was still important for her to be there too. That could help the boy. So, for Asel's sake, they should go together. The protagonist thinks that was somewhat understandable. For Asel, both the capital and the Imperial Castle must have been unfamiliar environments, and that might be overwhelming him. April hadn't even considered that during the move. She also thinks that Claude apparently had a surprisingly thoughtful side. Smiling, she explains that she had failed to understand His Highness's genuine intentions. Holding Asel's hands, the girl asks if it's okay if they go together. Happy. The boy agrees. And so they prepare to depart, going by carriage to the place. Looking out the window, April had already expected the Imperial Palace to be truly magnificent, but she was still amazed by the view. Claude points out that they'll arrive shortly. Already inside the palace, walking through its halls, they reach a door where they find a guard saluting. The soldier explains that he may enter, calling him Your Highness. When the door opens on the other side, they see a priest ahead. The three walk in together, and upon arriving, Claude comments that it had been a while since they last saw each other, and then asks Asel to come closer. They were going to officially check if the two had a blood relation. The protagonist thinks this was just an official procedure, but even without a reason, she was still nervous. The priest explains that the two should place their hands in the water while holding hands. When they do so, a faint glow appears, and the man explains that they can remove their hands. After that, the water begins to emit a faint green light, and the temple priest officially declares that they had blood ties. Claude says he already knew that, and points out that since they were in the Imperial Palace, they should register Asel officially. The protagonist explains that in that case, she would go to the lounge, and signals that, in truth, her feet were killing her. After all, she was in high heels. Claude says that's fine and that they'd meet in about an hour. April then asks the boy if he'd be okay going with the Duke. Concerned about her, Asel says yes, asking her to rest a little. Leaving the palace, the protagonist groans in pain, wondering if the lounge was still far from there. The doubt of whether or not she was lost starts creeping into her mind. Somewhere else, a woman with red hair complains, asking why her desserts keep getting rejected. After all, they had promised her that next time, her desserts would be presented to His Majesty. She had even developed a new recipe just for that. The girl was an imperial pastry chef. Her name was Sophia Sacker. Indignant, she asked what the reason for this was. A few days ago, a man pointed out that Sophia had already been working for 2 years as a professional pastry chef, so she could start making desserts for His Majesty. The one saying that was the palace's head chef himself. Hearing this, the young woman gets excited, asking if it was really true. The man affirms again. However, he adds that they couldn't serve a regular dessert to someone so important, asking the girl to make a dessert that His Majesty had never tasted before. Sophia had started cooking when she was just 15. She did any task she was assigned and always worked hard, focusing entirely on her desserts. The memories of people asking if the dishes were already clean still lingered in her mind. She became a certified pastry chef about 2 years ago. However, that didn't mean they would give her a chance. After so much effort, after so much time, finally an opportunity came up. She wondered if all of this was because she was a woman. From time to time, someone would make a joke about it, even saying she should be at home studying to become a bride. But she tried not to let it bother her, still fulfilling all her duties. She could endure that kind of situation as long as she could keep baking her pastries. Sophia wondered how they could mock her without even tasting her desserts. The girl states that she knew she had been ignored all this time, but still, it wasn't right to ignore her dessert without even tasting it. That statement sparked something in the chef. Annoyed, he asked what she meant by that, saying he asked for something His Majesty had never tasted, and she just showed up with a regular ganache cake. Sophia tries to argue that it was just the exterior, and that the ingredients inside were different, but the man doesn't care, stating it was just a cake even after that. Trying to grab him by the shoulder, the young woman asks him to taste it for himself. Pulling her arm forcefully, the chef yells, irritated for being bothered over a simple cake. His sudden movement ends up knocking the girl's dessert to the ground, all her work thrown to the floor with just one gesture. She wonders how the chef could do something like that. The man snaps back, complaining that she had brought it too close to his face, still accusing her of dirtying the kitchen, ordering the girl to clean it up quickly. As he leaves, the chef still complains to the other cooks who watched everything, ordering them to get back to work. Sophia is left alone in the kitchen, staring at all her work now on the ground. While cleaning, she thought she couldn't keep doing this anymore. It was all just too much humiliation. Later, the young woman was sitting under a tree with the remains of her cake beside her. She blamed herself after all. She couldn't even bring herself to throw it away. Suddenly, the protagonist approaches, apologizing for bothering her. April cheerfully asks her where the lounge was. 10 minutes earlier, the protagonist thought it was a good idea to take a walk outside, but she ended up getting lost. After all, around her, she could only see a dozen trees, wondering where she was. But the girl spots another person nearby. With her strength renewed, she thinks that just asking would make everything fine. Back to the present, all her energy disappeared in the next instant. After all, the atmosphere was horrible since she had arrived just when Sophia was crying. Despite the awkward atmosphere, April still says hello, trying to approach the girl. And sitting down a bit unsure of what to do, she says her name was April. Turning to her, the protagonist says she didn't need to worry, since she was a nice person who just got a little lost, stating that the streets of this place were really confusing. Still with her head down, the red-haired girl introduces herself as Sophia Sacher. The protagonist remembers that name was a bit familiar to her, especially the last name Sacher. She also remembers that this cake looked extremely familiar to her. At first glance, it looked like just a regular chocolate cake, but inside it had something different. The protagonist then asks if the filling inside the cake was apricot jam. Sophia is surprised, asking how she knew that. After all, she hadn't told anyone. The protagonist then gets startled, confirming her suspicion. That cake really was a Sacher torte, and apparently there was a touch of realism in the book by making this reference to real-life desserts. In other words, this girl had created that type of cake in that world. The protagonist thinks it would be amazing if someone like her worked at her cafe. Then, April asks why she was crying, and the reason she was carrying a smashed cake like that. Sophia then lowers her head again, beginning to cry. The girl tries to explain, but the tears stop her from finishing the sentence. The protagonist then thinks she probably shouldn't have asked and only ended up rubbing salt in the wound, wondering what she should do in a situation like that. And remembering something, April asks if there was any place nearby where she could make some coffee. A little later, the two arrive at a kitchen, and Sophia asks her to come in. She also states that outsiders normally weren't allowed. The protagonist asks if it was really okay for her to be there. Still a bit affected by what happened earlier, Sophia says it's fine. After all, who even cared about what happened there anymore? She was practically exempt from the rules of that kitchen. Sophia gathers everything April needs to make coffee, and the protagonist thanks her. But she still asks why the protagonist needed whipped cream, since she was only planning to make coffee. April explains that she wanted to make coffee with a bit of cream on top. The protagonist thinks that a cake like the one the girl had made really paired well with Vietnamese coffee. First, she needed to add the right amount of sugar to the whipped cream, and then beat it until it thickened and slowly doubled. After that, it was necessary to extract the espresso using a bit less water than usual, and pour it over the cream. She thinks that Vietnamese coffee really was the ideal coffee to be eaten with a Sacher torte. And finally, she uses her magic, hoping Sophia wouldn't feel so bad anymore. and the coffee suddenly starts glowing. So she hands her the cup, saying she made it for Sophia. Realizing she had never seen coffee like that before, Sophia asks what the recipe was called. April explains it was called Vietnamese coffee and asks if she'd like to eat it with the cake she had made. Sophia explains that the cake had fallen to the floor, asking if they were really going to eat it anyway. The protagonist points out that it would be fine if they just cut the best pieces to eat, especially if they took a portion from the inside. Sophia is a bit reluctant. April says the girl had baked it hoping someone would like it, so she would at least like to try it. April says she always hopes people feel happy after drinking the coffee and eating the desserts she makes. So that's why she had made the coffee for Sophia. And a bit embarrassed, she says that actually, even if it looked a little big, her cake looked extremely delicious. Smiling, the cook asks her to wait a moment and grabs a knife to cut the cake. Sophia explains that it looked a little humble, but asks if the girl would still like to try it. Not understanding what she meant by that, the protagonist says she'd enjoy it plenty. Sophia then asks if she'd like to try it with the leftover whipped cream. April says that would be interesting and asks if she could. But first, she should try her coffee. The protagonist explains she shouldn't mix the cream with the coffee, but enjoy them as they are. With a tear rolling down her face, Sophia says it's really delicious. Noticing that Sophia liked it, the protagonist smiles, thinking her magic worked well, so maybe she should try baking a cake someday too. But upon tasting Sophia's dessert, the protagonist is shocked, focusing on the flavor she felt. The chocolate is slightly bitter and coats the mouth, while the bittersweet taste of the apricot jam and the whipped cream topping made everything better. Not dry at all. She truly loved this dessert. The protagonist explains that the cake was really delicious, pointing out that the combination of apricot jam and chocolate was perfect. Smiling, Sophia says she appreciates the compliment. A little later, with the two sitting at a table, the cook says that ever since she was little, she always wanted to make desserts, that she wanted to see people try and enjoy what she cooked. So when she arrived at the Imperial Kitchen, she wanted to learn much more, and she thought she would be able to present wonderful desserts. But she thinks she was wrong. She was always rejected just for being a woman, and many of her desserts were often ignored. Just thinking about it made her feel extremely miserable. But suddenly, April covers her hand, asking if Sophia would like to join her. The baker doesn't understand what she meant, but the protagonist explains she's opening a cafe in the capital with the investment of the Duke of Winterville, stating that she'd need a partner to run the cafe with her. Sophia asks if she wants to hire her as the cook for her coffee shop, and April replies, yes, pointing out that her goal is to introduce coffee and desserts to more people. If her goal were only to become the head commander of the Imperial Kitchen, she wouldn't have made this suggestion. However, since her goal was similar to hers, she asks if it wouldn't be a good idea to work together. The protagonist knew it was a very sudden request, but she hoped she'd at least think about it. Sophia then calls her by name, but desperately, April asks what time it was now. The protagonist had finally remembered that Aisel and Claude were waiting for her. She says she'd be saying goodbye, and then asks Sophia to please visit the Winterville mansion sometime, explaining that if she said she wanted to see her, they'd let her in. Winking at her, April leaves the kitchen, hoping they'll meet again later. Speechless at how fast she left, Sophia tells her to be careful. Waving, the protagonist tells her to do the same. Alone in the kitchen, Sophia places her hand on her chest and thinks she can't even imagine how many people could try her desserts now. But anyway, if she really received the Duke's investment, it wouldn't just be a dream coming true. And earlier, while eating her cake, April seemed truly happy. If only she could see that reaction in other people too. But her thoughts are interrupted by the head chef. He arrives yelling, saying he finally found her, asking what she was doing. He points out that the floor was still dirty and asks what kind of woman she was that couldn't even clean the floor properly. Untying her apron, the woman interrupts his yelling, throwing it in his face, asking if she was crazy and what she thought she was doing. The chef gets angry, but not more than Sophia herself, who, with a clenched fist, said she wouldn't do it anymore. She was quitting that damn place. A little later, a carriage was moving through the capital streets. The protagonist thought she told Sophia she'd wait for her, but wondered if she'd really come. The cafe wasn't even open yet, so instead of working at her little coffee shop, staying in the palace kitchen would be much more stable. But she thought that when she arrived, she would feel a little more at ease. A few days later, the protagonist was reading a book on a couch, and hearing a knock at the door, she allowed the person to come in. The butler then apologized for interrupting her, saying that a lady named Sacher had come to visit her. The man continued, stating that he heard the girl was here for a meeting with April, asking how he should proceed. Closing her book with a smile on her face, the protagonist asked the butler to take her to the living room, saying she'd be there shortly. Sophia waited there, wearing casual clothes and holding a box in her hands. Arriving at the living room, April's face lit up, happy that she had really come. The cook said it had been a while and asked how the protagonist was. April then invited her in. Already seated at the table, the protagonist asked if the young woman had really quit the kitchen. Sophia said she had already reached her limit and couldn't take it anymore, so she just left. She added that at least she finally managed to stand up to that idiot, so she felt a little relieved. Smiling awkwardly, the protagonist thought that Sophia had probably been holding it in for a long time. The cook said she hesitated a bit before coming to the Duke's house, also pointing out that finding the Winterville mansion wasn't as easy as it seemed. April agreed that it was totally understandable, saying that finding the way there was certainly challenging. Sophia said she was worried about going to the wrong place and ending up angering the Duke, getting punished or something like that. The protagonist thought that made sense. After all, Claude didn't exactly have the best image in the public eye. There were literally rumors about his ancestors making pacts with demons. Adding to that his cynicism and peculiar personality, he probably ended up seeming even scarier. Despite that, April didn't think he was scary to the point of making someone tremble or anything like that. The girl had completely forgotten that she herself had trembled during her first meeting with the Duke. She continued thanking Sophia for coming and asked if that meant she had made her decision. With a cheerful expression, the young woman said yes, stating that she would love to work at her cafe. She really wanted to finally see people appreciate her desserts. When April was about to say something, Sophia interrupted her, asking her to wait a moment and began fiddling with a box. Presenting the box, Sophia blurted out in embarrassment that she really wanted April to try this cake one more time. The girl didn't understand, since she had already eaten the cake Sacher made the last time they met. Irritated, Sophia pointed out that that day didn't count at all. After all, she had given her savior a cake that had just fallen on the floor. She considered it a disgrace to the entire Sacher family, asking for one more chance. Seeing all this enthusiasm, the protagonist asked if it wouldn't be better to go downstairs and share it with everyone. Sophia agreed, saying that would be even better. Seated at the table, the head chef of the Winterville family asked if the young lady would like to hear other opinions about her cake. April explained that Sophia would be the pastry chef at her cafe, introducing her to everyone. She continued, saying they'd like to hear Mr. Hans's opinion on the recipe Sophia had developed. After all, they had heard a lot about his experience with desserts. Embarrassed, Hans scratched his head, reacting shyly to the compliment. Excited, Asel asked if the cake would be today's snack. Saying yes, the girl said they would have a very special chocolate cake today. And then she stood up to cut it. Everyone tried it. Asel said it was really delicious. Hans said it was the first time he had eaten something like that, asking if it was really apricot in the filling. Surprised that those two ingredients worked so well together. He apologized for not having high expectations at first when he saw it was just a regular ganache cake, saying that was rude of him. Sophia said she was actually happy to receive a positive review, remembering that the head chef of the empire didn't even bother to try it. The man had just called the cake ordinary and told her to throw it away. Hans said he heard she had worked in the royal family's kitchen and asked if the current chef, the idiot she kept talking about, could be a man named Matthew. Sophia said that's exactly who it was and asked if they knew each other. Hans explained that they had planned to go to the same academy and that Matthew had always been arrogant but seemed to have gotten worse after joining the palace, as if the title went to his head. He continued, saying he was ashamed to have ever worked by his side. April turned to Sophia, asking where she planned to stay now. After all, as far as she knew, the people who worked at the palace lived in dormitories provided by the imperial family, but that wouldn't be the case anymore now that she had quit her job. The young woman said she would return to her hometown for a while. Since she had been busy for a long time, she never had a chance to do that. And since the cafe would take some time to open, she would help her parents until then. Sophia also said that her parents grew and produced flour, so she could freely test her recipes. Hearing that, April quickly asked if she could have a supply of that flour. Sophia was surprised at first, replying that maybe that could be possible. Excited, the protagonist asked if the supply could be delivered directly to the cafe, thinking that if that were possible, she wouldn't need to worry anymore about finding a reliable supplier. The cook said that sounded good to her, also adding that she could guarantee the product's quality. Holding her hands, April thought that if someone like her was saying that, there was no reason not to trust her. And that would be even better, since they'd have ingredients their pastry chef was already used to working with. Excited, they agreed on the exchange. The girl then asked if Asel had already finished his meal. The boy said yes, and addressing Sophia as Miss Sacher, he asked what the name of that cake was. The young woman said she hadn't decided on a name yet, so the protagonist suggested calling it Sacher Torte. Sophia was confused for a second upon hearing that, but April explained. After all, her last name was Sacher, so combining it with torte, which meant a cream batter inside a sponge cake, fit well. She asked if it was okay to put her name on a product they would be selling at the cafe, but the protagonist quickly said of course it was, since she was the one responsible for making it anyway. That way, from now on, this cake would be called Sachertorte, a chocolate cake with so little filling inside it was almost a pity. Sophia had promised her they would meet again in a month, and immediately left by carriage for her hometown. April thought it was a bit disappointing to see her leaving like that, but even so, she waved at her. The protagonist now only needed to find an alchemist and a barista. A little later, the girl was pushing a cart through the mansion's hallways. Upon knocking on the door, a voice asked her to come in. Entering the room, Claude, who didn't even take his eyes off the documents on his desk, said it was probably time for his coffee. April asked how the Duke knew that without even looking. Claude explained that he could tell by the sound of her footsteps, because it was very different from the others, pointing out that she walked with confidence. Hearing that, the girl realized how sharp his senses were. Awkwardly, the protagonist apologized, saying she would walk more carefully next time, but the Duke said that's not what he meant, asking her to continue just as she was, saying that feeling confident wasn't a bad thing. Still unsure of what to say, the young woman agreed. The Duke then asked what that was, feeling that something was different from usual. Smiling, April said she had made a special coffee for him today. When asked, the girl said she had made filtered coffee, a slightly different brewing method. She explained she used the drip method, which unlike espresso didn't contain any coffee oils, so the flavor was a bit cleaner. That way, the taste could be adjusted depending on personal preference. Then, April asked what flavor the Duke preferred, giving examples like a stronger acidity or even a mild nutty taste. Claude asked why. April said she just wanted to know his preferences so she could make coffee that suited him best, and annoyed, asked if he thought she would poison his coffee or something. Seeing her exaggerated reaction, the Duke said that wasn't what he meant. After thinking a bit, Claude said that in that case, he'd prefer something light instead of bitter. Feeling energized and smiling, April said she would need to prepare it a few times since the first brew always came out a bit more acidic. First, the filter was placed in the dripper and pre-ground coffee beans were added on top. Then, hot water was poured in circular motions at the center of the coffee grounds, just a little at a time, and then let rest for a moment. She pointed out that not letting the coffee infuse during those moments was really an important skill, and when the vaporized coffee finally bloomed, before it completely sank, another round of water was poured following the same steps. Since that first brew was always extremely acidic, if you preferred a more full-bodied flavor, you should separate and prepare that first. And finally, she summoned her wishes to complete it, wishing that Claude would have a good night's sleep. Finishing her entire explanation, the girl said it was ready, and Claude finally takes his sip of coffee. April asks if he liked it. The Duke says that the aroma and flavor went very well together. The protagonist thinks she would also like to try it, but since it was already late, she would hold back a bit. In her mind, the young woman laughs at the irony of drinking coffee to help with sleep. The Duke then asks her what was so funny. When she tells him, Claude asks what was so surprising about that. April explains to him that coffee wasn't normally a drink for such a late time at night. At first, the Duke doesn't understand the meaning of that. The protagonist then explains that coffee contained caffeine, a substance that when consumed at night interfered with sleep. Confused, Claude says it's the first time he's heard that word. Realizing her mistake in saying something that probably wouldn't be discovered for years, April thinks she really must sound strange talking about that. Trying to cover up, she says she read that a while ago in a book, about the effect of caffeine on sleep. Agreeing, the Duke changes the subject, asking what that was behind her. Looking at the cart, the girl explains that it was a dessert called Sachertorte, and that it had been developed by a pastry chef who would work at her cafe, so she wanted the Duke to try it. Claude is surprised to hear she hired a pastry chef. A bit embarrassed, she explains that it was practically impossible to try and organize and do everything alone in a cafe, but then she apologizes for having gone through the whole process without even consulting him. The Duke asks what she was apologizing for. After all, the cafe was entirely her responsibility in the end. Sighing, he says he didn't have much knowledge about that business, so the girl had the freedom to do what she thought was most appropriate. Then he returns to the topic of the dessert, asking if they wanted him to try it. Agreeing, the protagonist says she would bring him a piece right away. With the cake already on the plate, she asks the Duke to eat and give his opinion. After eating, Claude says it was sweet. April asks if that's all he had to say. The Duke says he really didn't like desserts, especially if they were too sweet. A little frustrated, the protagonist says he should have mentioned that earlier, and that it was fine if he hadn't eaten it. Observing her reaction, the Duke sees an opening. Standing up and walking toward her, Claude asks if by any chance the girl was upset. Blushing and embarrassed, April yells, asking who was upset here, saying she was just disappointed. Smiling, Claude says that's a relief. Seeing him walk away, the protagonist thinks indignantly that it scared her, wondering why he suddenly got close and made such a fuss. The Duke then says that, come to think of it, he didn't know much about April. The girl doesn't understand, not getting what he wanted to know about her. Claude says he hadn't asked her anything about herself until now. The protagonist says there wasn't anything particularly notable to share, but the Duke replies that he won't ask anything unusual. He just wants to know the basics, things like her family and past. Gripping the table and anxious, April says she has no family, but she swallows hard, thinking that, strictly speaking, regarding the family of her current body, they had existed up until about 2 months ago. Looking at her from the corner of his eye, Claude says he understands. The girl thinks that when someone says they have no family, people usually react quite strongly. She wonders if it's because Claude was used to that he remained so calm. The protagonist never expected that kind of solidarity coming from a male lead in this kind of situation. Changing the subject, he asks about the cafe, wanting to know how long April had been working on it. The girl says she had been keeping it running for about a month, but of course had studied a bit on the subject before that. But April is still surprised by the question. After all, she thought the Duke had that information for a long time. The protagonist doesn't understand when she hears that this wasn't the case. Claude had all the means to check her background, and since she would be someone serving him coffee every day, it would be natural to take some precautions. The Duke then says he understands how she thinks, but something as trivial as a little poison wouldn't even give him a stomachache, so there was no need to worry about that. The protagonist thinks that surely he wouldn't die from something like that. Claude asks if he seemed like that kind of person, and nervously the protagonist says no, trying to cover it up. But the Duke quickly realizes April was lying, saying it was very obvious when she did. The protagonist asks if he couldn't just ignore that, but Claude doesn't miss the chance to tease her a bit, and smiling says that it's fine, that he would kindly do so. Then he asks what the girl was doing before this. When confronted with that question, the girl realizes he was referring to the real life of this world's April, before she was in her body. The girl didn't have much to say about that, and a little embarrassed, explains that she lived a normal life with her family. April thinks that although she was more or less neglected, she wondered how many noble families actually had a close relationship between parents and children. Claude asks her if she hadn't just said a moment ago that she didn't have any family anymore. The girl explains that no one in this world started without a family, stating that she had a family in the past, but that didn't remain until the present. The Duke says he understands what she means. But turning around, the girl indicates that it wasn't something he needed to worry about, and explains that in fact, her parents hadn't really died. It turns out she had requested to be removed from the family by her adoptive parents. Claude doesn't understand and is surprised for a moment, then asks her why she would want to be rejected by them. Repeating and trying to understand the question, Claude finally asks if she was adopted, which she answers yes, and after that had left her family to open a cafe. Smiling, the Duke asks if she was sure she hadn't just run away from home. Laughing, she jokes, saying there's no way someone her age would be running away from home. Claude then asks her if she ever went after her biological parents, and April herself replies no, questioning why she should do that. Claude answers that the white magic attribute was strongly influenced by genetics, but he quickly realizes that the girl probably didn't know that either. She replies that she really had no idea, saying it's the first time she's heard about it. So the Duke takes this as an opportunity to explain how it all worked. He points out that white magic was often inherited, and that there was a high possibility one of her parents had that ability. And considering there weren't that many mages with that attribute, finding her biological parents wouldn't really be a difficult task. The protagonist is confused, thinking about finding her real parents. Claude says that as her business partner, he could help her with that. She thinks that if it were the real April, maybe she'd like to do that and search for her origins. However, she wasn't sure if those people would get along with the Leonin family, so she gently declines his offer. And when asked why, the protagonist says that it would have made sense if she had that opportunity when she was younger. But at the moment, she didn't really find it useful to look for them now, and also didn't want to waste the emotional energy required for that. With his hand on his face and thoughtful, Claude says he'll respect her wishes. The girl then asks if he was curious about anything else or had another question. Claude replies that actually, no. April says she said this several times, but really hopes the Duke doesn't think she approached him on purpose or with hidden motives, explaining that she just wanted a peaceful life while managing her cafe. Claude says he understands, but asks if the young woman had any questions for him. Surprised, April asks if he would really answer if she asked him, receiving the reply that it would depend on her question. Because she had read the whole novel, there weren't many things the protagonist didn't know about Claude. Even so, she would like to hear something directly from him. Things like his childhood and relationship with his family, especially his older brother, and how he had lived up until now. However, she thinks she really couldn't ask those questions at the moment. Even though the Duke treated her well now, he was still a cold and cruel person. She remembered that very well. so the girl couldn't afford to jeopardize their relationship by asking useless questions. Thus, April decides to move on to another topic, asking him which coffee he liked more, the Americano or the drip coffee he had just drunk. Expressionless, Claude asks unenthusiastically if that was really her question. April says it was an important matter to her, since she was his personal barista. Thinking for a moment, the Duke says that today's coffee was better. Smiling, the protagonist says she'll prepare hand-brewed coffee from now on. Claude smiles back and looks at the girl for a moment, saying that he'd be happy if she could do that. That sentence shook the poor girl, her heart beating faster. The protagonist then says she's already taken up enough of his time and that she was heading out. With that, she asks Claude to enjoy his evening rest. Leaving the room, April was breathing heavily, not understanding why she was like that, her heart suddenly almost jumping out of her chest. She thinks that, anyway, this was just a novel, and so she should think of Claude only as the male lead. However, just now, she saw him as a living and real person. Looking back, April realizes she'll have trouble. After all, she would have to see him every day, wondering how she'd be able to deal with that. In the room, Claude stood still murmuring, saying that she left in a hurry. The Duke really had been investigating the girl after all. There were definitely more than just a few suspicions in the things she said. He realized it from the moment he saw her for the first time. It was obvious she wasn't just a simple countryside woman. Although the clothes she wore seemed simple, they weren't made of cheap fabric. Her white and clear face, like someone who had never worked under the sun, clearly showed she wasn't from the working class. Even her knowledge about snacks and teas was high-end, things an ordinary person would never have access to. However, when he saw her working in the kitchen without any maids, the girl didn't seem like a noble or merchant either. So it was no surprise that Lloyd was uneasy about her. He remembers Lloyd asking him for permission to investigate Miss April. After all, there was still the possibility that she had been able to use magic all this time, just pretending otherwise before, claiming that maybe she was deliberately trying to take care of Asel to get close to him. Turning around, Claude tells Lloyd to stop, asking how April could even know about Asel before Lloyd had even brought it up to him, wondering if he really believed something like that made any sense. And so, if he wanted to investigate her, he'd need to give him a better reason, which his aide obeys. Walking, the Duke thinks that even if she had approached him on purpose, it didn't matter anymore. After all, he could easily deal with most poisons since they didn't affect him, and any physical attack would be blocked effortlessly with his abilities. However, earlier he was only trying to help her relax, which, by the way, had the complete opposite effect. Sitting down, he thinks that the young woman was an adopted child who even asked to be kicked out. That at least proved she didn't come from a very happy family, but it also meant they probably didn't know about her magical talent. While holding some calming effect cigarettes, he figured he wouldn't need them anymore from now on. While thinking, Claude recalls that she seemed uncomfortable from the very beginning. At that time, he wondered how someone could be so small, at a height that barely reached his shoulder, her eyes, mouth, and nose all fitting on that small face. Even so, what surprised him most was the way she protected Asel, even when she had no connection to the boy. That must have been really stressful for her. But even so, she still kept a happy smile whenever she made his coffee. In many ways, to him, April was a very interesting person. And sitting in his chair, the Duke says that he'll probably be looking forward to his nights from now on. A few days later, someone asks if Asel was sick. The doctor says that he wasn't particularly ill or feverish, pointing out that it was probably due to stress. So they should just wait for some sign of improvement over the next few days. The protagonist thinks that a lot had happened lately, so it was natural that this had a negative impact on his body. After all, Asel had always been very vulnerable to stress. However, since the doctor said he'd recover soon, April believed everything would be fine. But Claude, thoughtful, says that wouldn't be enough, and seriously says that they should call a priest. The protagonist finds it quite surprising to see Claude so nervous, and touching his back, she politely calls him. With a bit of jealousy, the protagonist explains that he already had her, asking then what was the need to call a priest. Claude turns around, wondering what she meant. April states that, in case he forgot, she actually had a good healing ability, and the Duke says she was right, but asks if that could really help heal him, since it was a case of stress-induced coma. But April says that was obvious, pointing out that she had even treated Asel before, so the Duke could leave everything to her. The girl says she would get ready, stating that since this was outside her contract, the protagonist jokes, warning that she might even ask for an extra reward for the job. But nodding seriously, Claude says she would be fairly rewarded for her generosity. But awkwardly, the girl looked at him strangely, saying that she was just making a joke. In other words, it was only playful teasing, questioning what kind of person Claude thought she was. The Duke replies that he believed she was a being driven by greed for money. Outraged, the protagonist asks if he really thought she would charge to treat Asel. but scratching his cheek, he says he really couldn't say that now. Irritated, the girl turns around, saying she would go prepare some hot chocolate. And smiling at her, the Duke asks her to please do so. Handing the cup to Asol, the protagonist tells him to be careful. After all, it was still hot. Sitting on the bed with the hot chocolate in hand, the boy thanks her, saying he would enjoy it, then taking a sip and even getting his mouth a little messy. Smiling, he comments that her hot chocolate was the best. April says she's happy to hear that he liked it, but that he shouldn't lie down right after drinking it and should make sure to brush his teeth before bed. Excited, the boy replies that he would do just that. A little later, at dusk, Asol was sleeping in his bed, someone placing a hand on his head to check his fever. Claude then states that his temperature had definitely gone down a bit. The girl says she's glad to know he's feeling a little better. And the Duke points out that if it weren't for her, his nephew wouldn't be recovering so quickly. So he thanks her. A bit thoughtful, April agrees, but Claude doesn't understand the reason for her reaction. Then she says she didn't expect him to be someone so grateful, saying that she knew he cared a lot about Asol, but he had only hired her for his specific treatment. The Duke points out that, technically, he had hired her to cure his insomnia, not as a full-time doctor for the family. However, despite that, he would still thank her for her help. The girl thought it was only natural to notice it, but the Duke was a very different person from what she had imagined. And smiling, she says she'll accept his gratitude then. Turning over in bed, Asol makes a bit of noise, and the Duke moves quickly to cover him with the blanket. The protagonist then wonders if Claude really cared that much about the boy. After all, when he came to see Asol for the first time, April had assumed it was only for political reasons. Just like in the novel, he didn't seem like someone who cared much about his bloodline. But now, she was sure of one thing. The man in front of her really did care about Asol. So, April says that the boy was very lucky to have an uncle who cared so much about him. The Duke turns to her and says she talks as if there were no one who cared about her like that. So the protagonist explains that it was because she really never had anyone who saw her that way. In her past life, the girl had been an orphan. Obviously, she had contact with the teachers and other children in the orphanage too, so she didn't feel that alone. But there was still some distance that made it hard to really think of them as her family. After she became an adult and gained her independence, no one had ever really cared about her. And maybe that's why in moments before her death, the girl had imagined what it might be like to have a family like that. And it was when she became April Linen that she realized sometimes it was better to have no family at all despite everything. After all that, she had tried to be a little less greedy with the things she thought she couldn't have. Claude asks her if she still thinks she has no one like that. The question surprises her for a moment. Then the Duke continues, asking if she really thought there wasn't anyone who cared about her. And surprised, the protagonist asks if he was referring to himself. Touching her forehead with a finger, the Duke mocks her, saying that actually he was talking about Asol. Embarrassed and with a red face, April comments trembling that so he was talking about the boy. Claude explains that if she got sick, it would make perfect sense for Asol to try to take care of her. And laughing a little, the girl says he had a valid point. But in her mind, she reflected on something, wondering if she seriously felt disappointed by what happened. Deep down, the protagonist could hardly wait for the possibility of hearing Claude say that he really cared about her, even questioning herself about what she was thinking, trying to get that out of her head. Speaking a bit louder than she should have. Due to nervousness, the protagonist explains that since the boy was getting better now, she would move on. And if anything happened, they could call her, wishing a good night and hurrying out of the room. As she ran, the girl thought that all of this had been extremely embarrassing. Still standing in the room, the Duke thought that she had really run off and escaped again. Claude thought he should have admitted that he also cared about her, but he was genuinely impressed with how amusing her reaction had been. Then, the Duke wondered what exactly he was worried about, wondering if it was about April. When he saw that sad expression on her face earlier, while the girl said she didn't have anyone like that, the Duke felt as if she were ready to disappear. That activated something in him, making him even want to reach out to her. But in the end, he held himself back, wondering what he was thinking, acting like he was worried about April. Then, he clenched his fist to restrain himself. Claude thought it wasn't possible that he could have feelings like that for someone.